So, what we're going to be talking to you about is, I'm going to be talking to you. This episode is going to be in the genre of crime, right? Versus a little bit of questionable analysis. And as I'm talking to you guys, you're going to be knowing the reasoning what that is. Now, let me first start out to say that talking about the criminal aspect of it, of these two murders, I just want to first start out to say that, there's a reason why people do things, right? Ranging from very simplistic things, right? Going into a room, right, and playing with your little sister or your brother and all that stuff, and just like bullying him, right, or hitting them on the head and stuff, right? And you're kind of wondering, right, why, does human beings do that, especially when they're that age, right? Because there's always an underlying reason why people do things. This is kind of, again, a very broad topic because within the past couple years, we've had an increase on, mass shootings, of course, with these murderers like Nicholas Cruz and the Stoneman Douglas, and of course, it's the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting that happened about 10 years ago. Now, being in the suspect shoes, right? We need to really like put ourselves, in their shoes. We got to put on our thinking caps on, and start to analyze this because, right? What's the reasoning why, right? For instance, why do we have these school shootings, right? Why do we have people operating the guns that are that are not correlated to how they should be properly used, right? Because at the end of the day, guys, it's not the guns themselves that are killing people; it's the people behind the guns, right? All right, because if that's the case, right, if you put a gun that's right on the middle of the street and there's nobody, if nobody's really like using it, the gun's not going to do anything, right? It's the actions and the personalities that are manifesting through that, from the time that person grabs the gun to the time that person, pulls the trigger. Now, we have to look at it like this. Parenting, listen, I enforce, so I have no kids, and, talking to elderly people and, of course, my parents on how, parenting styles are very important. Right? It's very crucial. It's very crucial with parenting skills, right? Being a parent is a very crucial thing, right? Especially with the child, because the child comes on this earth with a blank slate, right? You are in charge of how that child comes out, right? So, being as it may, we're born on this earth with a blank slate. We don't really have our personalities developed, right? And like they talk about psychology, we have the nature and nurture aspect of it, right? The nature is the personality that is inherited, right? That we get from our parents, which we have no control of, right? Whatever those personality traits are, right? We naturally inherit that. Now, the most important thing, and the most important take on this is, right, that is obviously out of our control. Now comes the nature part of it, right? Well, not nature, nurture. I'm sorry, nurture, right? The nurture aspect of it is what we inherit, right, through environmental factors. And again, it's all based on the parents, right? If the parents are teaching you discipline, respect and disrespectfulness, right? You're inheriting that and you're processing that within your own emotions and you're forming your own personality traits behind that. So, what I want to say is, right, for a lot of these murderers, there is a distinction that they didn't get enough attention as a child, right? There was a lot of alcoholism that was involved with both spouses. There was a lot of domestic abuse, and that is inherited, right? Growing up in the house, thinking that is normal, right? Especially, if you feel that you're not loved and you got both parents treating you like crap, right? You feel that you're just a menace to society. So, right, that's where it all stems, and that's where it all stems for people that are being raised in homes, and for them to commit these acts. Now, I want to get into the story of, well, before I get into that, I also want to say, right, look, right, the sad thing about this is Um, we live in a generation, right, where the child is taught the word no, right? Because the parents that are being raised, mostly that I've seen at least, right, and I'm sure some of you all have seen it, I noticed the ones that are the millennials, the older millennials, the younger millennials, and the older Gen Zs, right? The kids, they don't discipline the child. They let the child get away with a lot of stuff, right? And this is the part that's very irritating, right? Because as a parent, you should teach the child no. You should teach the child that they shouldn't be, um, you know, getting in return, for something to cure their frustratedness, right? So they should be taught that everything they get in life, right, is not always going to come to be, right? You're not going to get everything in life, right? You shouldn't spoil the kid. You shouldn't spoil, You don't get everything in life. Look, everybody knows, there's a Rolex watch, right? You see a nice looking Rolex watch. What's the first thing you're going to do? Well, you're going to say, well, I can't really get that Rolex watch, right? I want to go over, you know what I mean? When you see a Rolex watch, you're like, well, how am I going to get that Rolex watch, right? Well, I want to do the easy way by trying to steal it, right? Again, this is where parenting becomes very important, right? In the back of your mind, the child reflects and they say, all right, well, what did my mom and dad tell me about stealing? It's wrong, right? It's wrong, right? So at the end of the day, right, the right thing to say is, well, if I want that Rolex watch, I'm not going to break behind a glass case and steal it. I'm going to find a way to where I can make really good money and save money to where I can buy it, right? So anyway, I just want to say that, in this generation with millennials and Gen Zs, there is a decrease that the child is being taught, and is not being taught the word no, and they're spoiling the child. Anyway. So, I remember in my old job, right, when working as a shoe salesman, there would be times where there would be parents that would, give in to the child's, complaint, right? Oh, I want this shoe. I want this shoe. I want to get this expensive Nike. The parents would tell them, no, you're not going to get it. The kid would jump up and down with a small fuss, and all of a sudden, by the end of the time they were shopping, they would come up to me and says, you have this in a 3, right? And I'm saying to myself, I'm like, wow, very good parenting skills, because you just taught your kid, that to get something in life, they got to bitch about it, right? So anyway, not to go off topic about that, the whole goal of bringing that up is, right, the personalities that are shaped, is relation to how we're raised on this earth. And a lot of these murderers, right, they don't have a proper upbringing, right? There are some out there, that do have normal parents, and then all of a sudden they just rebel. It just happens, right? But I think with that, it's different, because it's not the parents that are doing anything wrong. It's the environmental factors, that is causing them to do these, like criminal acts. There was even a book that I read a while back, where there's been studies with criminals, right, where there is a part of the brain that is not developed properly, right? There's a part of the brain that isn't developed, right, within these criminals, to where they are, they lack empathy, right? They lack the empathy that, God, man, I'm doing something very wrong, and I do not like, I don't like the way I don't like the energy this person's giving off. So, fast forwarding into that, I'm going to be talking to you about, murderer number 1. I'm going to be talking to you about Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, Jeffrey Dahmer, there's been a series on that on Netflix that was on the air last year, right? Well, it was streamed, and I also have the story as well to back it up, because I want to make sure, I get the names right and stuff. So, let's talk about Jeffrey Dahmer, right? Jeffrey Dahmer, right? You see this guy, and you're like, oh, it looks like a normal guy, right? Looks like a normal guy, very fairly good looking, he looks like a very smart guy, right? Because he's got glasses and stuff, being the stereotypical, right? But what is underneath all of that, right? What is shaping his personality? So, he was born on May 21st, 1960. He was known as one of the Milwaukee cannibal, murderer. and he was also a sex offender, and he dismembered and killed males between the years 1978 and 1991, right? So he was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and and he was found to be legally sane at his trial. Now, being as it may, right, we need to go in deep of his childhood, right? Because according to this article, right, it's saying that he, going to the parents, it's saying that he didn't get enough attention when he was a baby, right? He wasn't getting a lot of attention, and right. So think about it, right? When you're a child, right, the attention is very great with the parents because you want to feel like you're very accepted. You want to, because we all have low self-esteem, right, with stuff, and we need that encouragement. They weren't really giving that to him, right, when he was a kid. So being as it may, he's again, his parents were always fighting, right? His father was always fighting, his mother was fighting, and the mother was like throwing stuff in the house. There was a lot of violence that was going on in the house, and it just made him feel bad because he's like, man, this is a very toxic environment. As he got older to be in his preteens, that's when he started drinking. When he was 14, he just started drinking, right? Just to alleviate that depression and stress, right? And then, he also realized that he was gay, and that that actually proposed, insecurity, right? Because he's like, why am I feeling this way now? You know, they weren't really devoted to him, when he was growing up and stuff. So, apparently, one of his, as we get into one of his first murders, right, one of the murders the first murder was Stephen Hicks, right? This was committed in 1978, 3 weeks after he graduated, right? So he's basically by himself, in his house, and right, so he's driving, on this road, and every couple days, he sees this nice-looking guy with no shirt on, he's all sweaty with his, chest bearing out, and and after seeing this guy, he's thinking, man, this is a very good-looking guy. I got to approach this guy, maybe invite him over to my house, right? So, apparently, he musters a courage and he talks to this guy, and he just starts introducing himself. Hi, I'm Jeff. What's your name? Well, my name's Steve. Nice to meet you, Steve. They start getting to know each other and stuff, and so they start, laughing and all that stuff, and Jeffrey asks him and says, well, where are you headed to? He goes, well, I'm headed to a rock concert in Lake Park, Ohio, right? Chippewa, or, Chippewa, right? So he asks him, says, well, I'll tell you what, you can hang out to my house, and we'll just have a couple beers, and then, like I said, you can head off, with your, rock concert and stuff. The guy's like, sure. So he brings the guy, his car, and drives him back to the house. And again, they had a few beers, and and again, as they're having a good time, Jeffrey is staring at his chest, and he's starting to get sexually aroused, and he's saying, man, like he starts getting sexual feelings about him. He starts getting he, but the thing was, is he noticed that, Steve was talking about girls, so that made Jeffrey Dahmer insecure, because he's like, man, this guy doesn't know that I'm gay, and he's going to reject me and stuff. So after they started listening to music and drinking and talking, it wasn't until, apparently the guy wanted to leave and go to his concert, and Jeffrey's like, well, why do you, why do you have to go? We're having a good time. The guy's like, I got to go, man. And Jeffrey started getting very snappy, and of course, the guy said, oh, you're weird, man. So apparently, Jeffrey took a 10-pound dumbbell, right? And, as the guy was leaving his house, he hits him. He bludgeoned him with a 10-pound dumbbell, right? 2 times behind, his head. And this knocks Stephen Hicks unconscious, right? And Jeffrey strangles him to death, suffocates him, right, with the barbell dumbbell. And he just starts taking, clothes, as the guy, when the guy died, immediately he takes, the guy's clothes off, right, to where he could explore his chest and his hands. And then he starts masturbating above, this guy's corpse, And so, So, him, again, what he does is he drags the body, into the basement, right? And he starts, dissecting it, right? Now, starts dissecting the body, starts taking, the guy's organs and stuff. And again, whatever dopamine that he wants, right? Based on how he's, having fun, right? Of course, right? With this guy's body, in his mind, you know, he just says, all right, well, I'm done, right? And he starts dumping the body, in a shallow grave, in his backyard. And wasn't until a couple weeks later, he unearthed the remains, and he just started like taking acid and started, drenching it on the body so he could dissolve, the evidence that there was a human body that was buried in his house. So, again, dismembered him, took his bones, dismembered him with a sledgehammer, and all that stuff. Now, this was his first murders. Now, there's a couple thoughts on that, right? There's a couple thoughts on that. Now, right? Based on that story, we know that he lacks empathy, right? He lacks empathy, realizing that this is absolutely wrong. You don't kill another human being, right? And, again, having parents, right, and living in a violent household like that, right? I mean, where was the thought of being taught, this is wrong factoring, right? Because at the end of the day, a normal person, that had a very good upbringing would be like, that's sick. That's absolutely sick, right? What this guy did, right? So, it's kind of sad. And, and there was, right? There was a, there was a story that when he was a kid, his father loved to bring animals home to dissect, right? His dad used to, love bringing animals home and dissecting, like organs and stuff. And he would show Jeffrey Dahmer, that, right? He would say, Jeff, check this out. This is the heart. This is the, and Jeffrey, loved that, right? Just loved that, right? That just fascinated him, and he just started feeling good, as he was dissecting these animals. And again, that could have an effect on whatever the wires that were in his brain, right, that were crossed, right, to do this on a human body, right? So this would be going on, right? This would be going on, within the next couple years, right? And again, he would meet these guys in bars, and he would just start, like talking to them, getting to know them. And again, he always said, "You want a drink?" And he was sure, and then they would have a couple beers. They would get a little, tipsy and stuff. And he would lure them into his apartment, right? So he would bring these guys into his apartment, and, they would start talking and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden, he always had his little Polaroid camera. And one of the things that the thing that he said to do with this camera was, I want you to take your clothes off, pose in the nude, right? Some of them would do it, some of them wouldn't, and they would refuse. And either way, if they did it and they refuse, the minute that they said that they're leaving his place, Jeffrey Dahmer would, excuse me, somebody's coming into the room. Sorry, I thought it was somebody. I'm sorry. Jeffrey Dahmer would just immediately, right, take pictures, and, he would take these suspects that was, he would hold them hostage, right? And he'd say, you're not leaving this place. He's like, what are you talking about? I got a family to go to, and he's like, no, you're not leaving this place. And he would handcuff them. And so he didn't like that, right? And he would threaten to kill them with a knife. And, but the one thing that he always had a habit of doing was he would bring his, victims into the room to watch the movie The Exorcist, right? And as he's watching the movie The Exorcist, he's putting his head on their chest, trying to get sexual with them. And so anyway, what he would do was he would drug their drinks, and all of a sudden, as he would drug their drinks, they would get drugged, and all of a sudden he would just kill them right on the spot, right? He would dismember the bodies, and he would put them in in the refrigerator, and he would also eat them, right? Now, this would happen consecutively a lot, right? And he had a woman that lived right next to him by the name of Glenda Cleveland, right? That was the woman that lived next to him, right? And she knew there was something off about Jeff because, she would be next to him and she would hear all sorts of noise, hand tapping on the, on the, and on the walls. She would hear screams, and this would concern her. This would really concern her, and so she just said, this is, something's going on. I got to call the cops about this, right? And the cops would come, and they would they knocked on Jeffrey Dahmer's door, and they would ask if everything is okay. Not really searching the house, but they would let him, they let him, off that night, right? It's okay. Well, we're getting reports of noises, next. Can you keep it down, right? And you'd be like, okay, whatever, right? So again, this would happen again. The lady would call the cops. The lady would call the cops, and again, this became a repetitive basis. The lady would call the cops. She knew in her soul that there was something going on with this guy, right? Taking these victims into his apartment, and they would never come back out, right? So, anyway, that all built up, right? Until in 1991, right? There was his survivor by the name of Tracy Edwards. Now, Jeffrey Dahmer met Tracy Edwards, right, in a club, or in the city. Oh no, yeah, it was in a club. It was in the Wisconsin city, right? And they just started talking, and asking him, what they do for a living, all that stuff, getting to know each other. So it wasn't until Tracy went with Jeffrey Dahmer, right, into his apartment. So all of a sudden, they start talking. The guy's tipsy and stuff, and it wasn't until immediately Jeffrey Dahmer handcuffed Mr. Edwards, and right. So he starts, again, with his victims, right? He would have that Polaroid camera, and he would say, I want you to pose in the nude with these pictures, and I want you to take pictures. If they refused to do that, he would threaten them. He would say, look, if you don't do what I'm telling you, I'm going to kill you, right? With this knife, right? So, so it wasn't, so this was going on, right? And somehow, he would also lure his victims into watching, again, the movie The Exorcist. And, so they knew, the guy noticed that he was getting into the movie, so much, right? He started going crazy, motionless, rocking back and forth in the chair, making strange noises with his tongues, and so the guy just, Mr. Edwards started getting, creeped out about this. So, so apparently, somehow by the grace of God, he's able to exit out, through his handcuffs, slide his hand underneath, the handcuffs, and he starts running for the door. And, and was more adrenaline. He had 8 different locks on the door, so that way his suspects wouldn't, escape. So he had to pick all of them out. He had to pick all the locks out. And so anyway, that's when Mr. Edwards, immediately escaped, the room that Jeffrey Dahmer was in, went downstairs into the lobby, and just started fleeing, crying with tears in his eyes, and started, talking to the, started flagging, these police officers. When he started talking to these police officers, at first were thinking, God, this guy's up to no good. What's he doing in the middle of the night? Telling us that there's a guy in the apartment, that was trying to kill him, even though he kind of has a criminal record himself, right? So anyway, within the convincement of the, of the victim, right, with the cops, he says, you got to go to Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment, right? So he goes up, to where Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment was, on that, floor. And, again, he's with the cops. The cops knock on the door. and they said, Jeffrey Dahmer, are you in here? And he opens up the door, and Jeff goes, can I help you? And the cop says, do you know this man? And Jeff goes, yeah, he was in my apartment, and he was just drunk, and I just wanted to make sure he was, fine, so I could, so I could drive him back home, sober. So, again, they look at the guy, Mr. Edwards, and they're saying, is this true? And Mr. Edwards says, no, so anyway, the cops eventually knew something was off with Jeff, right? So they started going into his apartment, right? The first thing they smelled was something rotten, right? There was rotten flesh, and rotten meat that was in there. So the cops open up, trying to figure out where the smell was. They open up the refrigerator, and there was a human torso with some limbs, arms, and a human head. Can you believe that? That would scare the hell out of me, right? And also you guys. So they also noticed that there was a whole bunch of nude pictures of men in his drawer, on his top drawer. And immediately they said, this guy needs to be put under arrest. Get his ass out of here, right? So, Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested. Now, we got to thank this guy, because if it wasn't for this guy, he would have still been killing a lot more victims. But then there's a moral of the story behind that, right? Because first of all, there was red flags that were going on. You have a person that's calling the cops repetitively that lives right next to Jeffrey Dahmer. They know something is very off, and the cops aren't really doing anything about it, right? They're just going in there, checking up on him, seeing how he's doing, and also not believing this lady. So it wasn't until Mr. Edwards, when he was on trial, he sued the police department of that city, and he said, because of you guys not really doing your job, there could have been a lot more lives saved, thanks to you guys not seeing that this was going on right behind closed doors, especially if he had a neighbor that was right next to him, knowing that there was something off. So, anyway, the moral of the story is, right, you just, like I said, you got to definitely be careful, who you meet, and really, especially as a woman, really, because women are at the height of their lives to be raped, so men is kind of like the same thing, but it's not as bad as women, and the only thing that men have to worry about is drugs being put in their drink. That's the only thing. But for women, unfortunately, sadly, they think that they have to worry a lot more, them getting, strangled by the guy and all that stuff. So, we're going to be moving on to another story. Welcome to story part 2. Now, I'm going to be talking to you about this guy by the name of John List. John List. Now, this story is very interesting because, towards the end of what I'm about to tell you, as I'm done with telling the story of John List, is how he was caught. That's going to be the most fascinating thing. Now, there was a show. Now, I heard about this guy because I watched this show called Forensic Files, and I watched this show called Forensic Files, and there is a story. This is called, the episode is called The List Murderers, right? And I'm going to put that underneath the YouTube video, right? So that way you guys can, watch this episode if you're interested in it. But basically what it was, this guy by the name of John List, he was born on September 17th, 1925, and he was an American mass murderer, and he was a longtime fugitive. He was on the run for basically about 18 years, right? And he had a new identity. He was remarried and all that stuff, and it just took years, right, to track this guy down. So getting on that, he had a lovely wife by the name of Helen and 3 beautiful children, at their home in Westfield, New Jersey, and mysteriously they disappeared. Now, getting into that, he was, his according to this, they say that, he had financial problems, and and that his family members were, steering away from their religious faith, and that was, the reason why he murdered them, and or his motivation for them to be murdered. And he just had this feeling, right, that in his mind, right, just like the Jamestown massacre in the late 70s, right, he believed that we lived in a very evil society, right, and that his excuse for killing his family was so they could go to heaven. That does not make any sense, right? Because first of all, if you're a religious guy, right, the first thing you would think is okay, God is in charge of judgment, right? Right? Whatever we do, we have no control except the manifestation of our actions, but we have no control in terms of where we're going to be put, right? You would figure a guy that's very religious, why is he thinking very pessimistic like that, like he's God, right? So, anyway, this is where I was talking about earlier, was there's a lack of empathy with these criminals. There is a lack of empathy with these criminals, and again, it's all about how they're taught, right? Not knowing, the stem of what's right and what's wrong, right? And having and lacking, like, sensitivity. That's a very common thing, lacking sensitivity and narcissism with these murderers. Now, so John List, one day on November 9th, 1971, he took a 1912 semi-automatic handgun and murdered his family. He killed his mother by the name of Alma, who was 84, above the left eye, his wife Helen, who was 47, his daughter Patricia, who was 16, his younger son by the name of Frederick, 13, and his older son John Frederick, who was 15, right? Now, apparently he actually killed everybody except for the elder son John Frederick at the time, right? However, after he picked him up and driving him home to, from a soccer tournament game, John List shot him repetitively, and there was evidence, that there was misfire because the son was attempting to, defend himself. So after all that was said and done, right, this guy's like, what am I going to do with the bodies? So he takes the bodies of his wife and his children, and he puts them in his ballroom because he lived in a mansion. So, again, he had this belief that if he killed his family, they would go to heaven, right? Knowing that this was a thing, which I'm sure he felt guilty because he knew he did wrong, he writes to his pastor, a 5-page letter to his pastor saying that there was so much evil in the world, and he killed his family because, because he wanted them to go to heaven, right? And, so again, this is a guilty thing because he's talking to his pastor, the guy that's close to God, right? As his messenger, right? So it was obviously to clear a guilt feeling. We know that, because why would you write a letter to your pastor saying what you did? You're looking for like a ventilation and all that stuff, like you're looking to vent, right? So John was, very slick. He cleaned, the crime scene, and he took all the pictures in the family photographs, so that way nobody could really know who he was, right? Now, little did he knew that he must have had friends that had like pictures of him and stuff, and so. But basically, it wasn't until, it wasn't until a month after he committed this murder on December, it was around December 7th, that's when they discovered the crime scene, right? And, so all of a sudden, the neighbors right across the street, they called the cops because they noticed that, everything was on. The lights were on, and there was no activity in the house, and the bulbs were burning one by one. That's how they kind of knew something was off, right? So the police go into the house, and they see these bodies. So, they knew, wow, what's this guy look like? What does this guy look like, right? Who did this, right? So somehow, they later found out through word of mouth that this man was the family of, of the wife and the kids. And so the most challenging part about it was trying to find out, um, you know, what he, where he was, trying to locate where he was because he had a different identity. He got remarried, trying to start off with a clean blank slate. So this is where it gets very chilly, guys, because, again, this is in the age where computers are at their infant stages. Right, and we didn't have all this digital technology like we got now where we can reconstruct the face on a computer. This was all like, molded in, right, and also done by, thought, because, so it wasn't until, years passed, 18 years later, after he committed, these murders, where the FBI, went up to a guy by the name of Frank Bender. Now, Frank Bender was a forensic construction analyst, where he would take pictures, right, of suspects, and kind of like mold how they would look, like, years later. And this man very creepily was very accurate. This guy was very accurate. And so apparently they had a picture of John List that they got from one of his friends that knew him, and they said, well, we need to know what this guy would look like. How would he dress in the year 1989, right? So anyway, Frank says, well, if it happened when he was in his 40s, he was a lot younger then, so he would be in his late 50s, early 60s by now. So according to my perception, we noticed that on the jawline of this man's face, that his jawline is a little bit more sinking in and droopy, and he would have wrinkles underneath his skin, because we also have a picture, of his mother as well. And, also looking at the angle of where his hairline is receding, and also, and also observing his style, right? What would he be wearing? So the crazy part about it was, right, this guy, Frank Bender, was able to construct, of what a modern day 60-something-year-old John List would look like, right? Started putting the glasses, and all that stuff. So once he was done, he gave it to the FBI and all that stuff. They ended up, putting it out there that this is an old picture of what John List looked like back in the early 70s, late 60s, versus what he would possibly look like today, right? This is where it gets very chilling, guys, because immediately when they, after they put him on the news, they put him in the newspapers, and also the wanted signs, in neighborhoods. They were able to track this guy, right? They were able to track him, and he was living in Virginia at that time. And I kid you not, right? This analyst was so accurate, as to how John List would look like. He got the glasses accurate and right. So what I'm going to also do is I'm going to put in underneath the video, like a picture of what John List looked like when he was apprehended versus the facial analysis of how he looked, right, years later. Now, how this guy, this guy was obviously very well thought and very well into, this guy Frank, like what he was into very well, because he literally was able to track this guy, thanks to his ability to envision what John List would look like if he was older, right? So that's the creepy story about it, right? So the moral of the story is, guys, is just, be very careful who you meet out there. If they seem very genuine, If there's, if you have a very bad feeling about somebody, and there's, just an intuition about them to where you don't really want to be around them, please follow that gut feeling, because chances are your gut feeling is right. So anyway, kind of to end this off, I'm going to close this off. Hope you guys have a wonderful day. Please subscribe to my channel, right? So you all can subscribe. And you guys have a very good day. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Have a good day, guys. Take care.